Hello, everyone. Welcome to Jeem podcast from the Center for Arab American Studies. This is Wissam Al-Maligi, the director of the Center for Arab American Studies at the University of Michigan, Dearborn. And we are very happy today to have Hannah Moushabeck, who will be talking to us about her work as a creative writer, but also about aspects of the industry as also a publisher as well. Hannah is an award-winner writer, and she has visited the University of Michigan Dearborn campus before and at the university, and she gave a talk about her work. And this interview will be another way to get to know more about her creative side and also the business side of publishing as well. Hannah, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure, absolutely. I like to say that my book career started the day that I was born because my parents started a publishing company 13 days after they brought me home from the hospital, which you'd think that they would be busy enough with the new baby, but they decided that, it wasn't enough. So I grew up, working as a teenager in my uncle's bookstore and, helping to pack books in my father's warehouse. And eventually I went off onto my own and worked in publishing. And I worked in publishing in the marketing department for about 10 years, mostly with children's books, until I decided to write my own children's book, which is called Homeland, My Father Dreams of Palestine. So that was my debut picture book, and it came out in 2023.
This sounds like a dream upbringing for anyone who becomes a writer. And it looks like your parents were specifically doing this for you. I mean, this is amazing. Yeah.
It is a dream until all your family vacations are just going to book conferences.
Well, I mean, I can see that too happening. But this is great. But I mean, so you were pretty much a born writer and publisher. I mean, you were raised in the world of writing. How did that shape or form your creative side? I mean, how did that inform who you are as a writer?
Well, my father always said that books are a gateway to a people's soul and that books have the power to change the world. And once you're introduced to this concept, and it's really solidified within you, it's very hard to do anything else. I was able to see in real time the ways that the books that my parents were publishing was having an effect on national conversations, whether it was publishing a Palestinian cookbook or the first ever Lebanese cookbook, where instead of calling things hummus, they called it chickpea paste because Americans had no idea what hummus was. I was really able to see the impact of books firsthand. And so I was sort of sucked into it. And I wasn't the only one. In fact, both of my sisters had ambitions of doing other things with our lives and ended up also working in publishing.
So, I mean, from what you said, when you talked about cookbooks, and how did your cultural background as an Arab American, as a Palestinian American, how did that influence your writing?
Well, I wrote my book sort of as an act of desperation because I had been working in children's book publishing for 10 years, right around the time where We Need Diverse books launched. And there was all this conversation about authentic representation of cultures that were underrepresented. And I was so enthusiastic about this conversation. In fact, many of the books that I worked on were some of the most prolific, diverse authors that are working today. I got to work on Caldecott Award-winning medalist Christian Robinson's first ever book. I got to work on Jason Reynolds, who was a two-time children's book national ambassador. I got to work on his books. Wow. And in all this time, I kept wondering, where are the Arab American books? Where are the books about Palestine? And I knew that publishing is a media industry just like every other. And editors face the same pressure from their institutions to suppress Palestinian voices. But I recognized that I was in a unique position as someone who knew people within the industry, had already established myself as someone trustworthy, that I might be able to sneak in a Palestinian manuscript, which might have otherwise been denied.
Mm. Did this put any pressure on you, feeling that you are representing an entire culture? Because this can happen a lot to writers or publishers in a country like the United States, with what we might refer to as a hyphenated identity, for instance. Do you feel that is this something that has been a blessing or a curse or a responsibility? How would you define it? How do you feel about that?
Oh my goodness, I was so panicked when I found out my book was being published. I did not want to be the only one with a Palestinian children's book. And, I recognize that I really do not represent all of Palestine. Firstly, I was born in the diaspora. I'm a Christian Palestinian. There's a lot of ways in which I don't, represent all of the varied identities of Palestinians. But I also recognize that someone had to kick down the door in order to let others in. So, about a year before my book was published, I started a group called Palestinians in Kid Lit. And I put a call out on the internet to any Palestinian living in the diaspora who wanted to write for children. And I created this support group where we meet monthly. And I was able to impart all of the insider knowledge of the publishing industry to all of these aspiring writers. And I'm happy to say it's been 3 years since we started that group. And there are now, I think, 10 of the members have book deals at traditional publishing houses. Shortly after my book came out, several other Palestinian picture books have come out. And of course, Interlink is a big part of that in publishing many, many Palestinian voices. In fact, we publish more Palestinians than any other publishing company in the United States.
Can you tell us a little bit more about your strategy as a writer, your routine as a writer? Because writers, of course, or creative people have different ways of going about their profession or the vocation or the art of writing. I mean, can you tell us a little bit more, share more about what you do as a writer? I mean, how do you write? How do you get the ideas? Is there something special about that or specific?
I have listened to so many interviews with writers where they talk about how they get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and they watch the sunrise and they write 100 pages before breakfast. And I have never been that writer. I have always written books at a stage of heightened emotion. I wrote this book, in 2018 when Israel had just bombed Gaza. And I was watching the videos of that carnage. And I was so angry that I wasn't able to do anything with the privileges and the powers that I had. And then, I thought to myself, wait a minute, maybe I do. Maybe I can influence my small corner of the world. Writing books has always come in fits of rage mostly, which is a funny thing to say about a children's book.
Yeah.
But my next picture book, which should be coming out in 2026, was written after October 7th and written through tears and sobs. And, it felt like I needed to get it out on a page so that I could be heard, because I felt like I had been sort of screaming into a void and been ignored by my peers and my government.
How do you navigate that? How do you navigate the need to be seen and heard and read with all the obstacles and the hurdles of whether outright censorship or like censorship in disguise, the book banning, the controversies? How do you navigate that? I mean, is that something that can? I'm sure it puts you off, but is it something that you can deal with in a different way? How did you deal with that?
Mostly I was raised to be unapologetically Palestinian, and that when people tried to suppress Palestinian voices, I would just get louder. I think that absolutely was the case this past 2 years. At no point did I shy away from talking about what I believed and using language like occupation and genocide in order to be more palatable. I think the time for being palatable and being patient with people has passed many, many years ago. And I spent a lifetime trying to win the hearts and minds of my peers in order to convince them of my humanity. And in the wake of this genocide, I've stopped doing that. I no longer feel like I need to justify Palestinian existence. And there has been a switch, I think, within me and within our community that is, almost freeing in a way. I was able to shed any shame that I felt, where now someone has to prove to me that they are not anti-Palestinian before they enter my world, as opposed to me proving my humanity to enter theirs.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's very well put. And your book was an award winner. It won the best children's book at the Arab American National Museum Book Awards in 2024. How does this kind of recognition from the Arab American community, how does that impact you? What does that mean for you?
Oh my gosh, it was the greatest honor I have ever received. I am mixed. My mother is British, my father's Palestinian. And so I have always been in between feeling not Arab enough and not white enough at the same time. And so to have an award that exemplifies Arab Americans, to me, felt like an official acceptance into the club.
Yeah.
I really felt so grateful that my book that resonated with so many people, and that they chose it, despite so many other really fantastic contenders. I was just so honored, and I think there's a lot of awards out there, but that one was the one that meant the most.
Being part of this community as a writer is very rewarding, but you're also part of that community as a publisher. And I know you talked a little bit about that before, but how can you reconcile, and it's not that there's a conflict, but how can you bring together both parts of being a creative person and also part of the industry, or a publisher and a writer?
Oh, I think it's actually, it's such a pleasure. I think, being a writer is a lot of pressure. You have to self-promote. You have to be in the spotlight. And I think I would much prefer to promote and shine a light on others. I think it gives me great satisfaction to platform writers that are underrepresented, that have, incredibly strong work, and to, get attention put on them. I think secretly maybe every author wishes they were a publisher too, to be able to, choose which books are going to be published. I really understand how big of a deal that is for writers. I also think now that I'm an author, I'm probably a better publisher, because I recognize how terrifying it is to be on the writing side as well.
Yeah, this is a dream, not just for you, but actually a dream for other writers, to have a publisher who's also a writer and therefore understands what they're going through. I want to ask you about Homeland, about your book, My Father Dreams of Palestine. As a children's book, it's illustrated. How can you talk a little bit about the dynamics of working with an illustrator for your book?
I was very lucky. A lot of publishers will not involve the author in the selection of an illustrator. But it was so important to me that the illustrator understood and had lived in the Middle East. And my illustrator is from Kuwait and is also Muslim. And I felt like that was very important, especially because I wanted Muslim Palestinian families to see themselves represented in my book authentically. So we went through many illustrators, and we settled on Reem. And this is her first ever book. So we had really only seen a collection of illustrations in her portfolio before commissioning the book. And she did such an incredible job. I'm really just in awe of how she captured my family and captured Palestine. I could feel that it meant a lot to her to be representing Palestine. I really believe that a picture book is a 50-50 collaboration between the author and the illustrator, that they can both bring themselves to the project. And so I approached Reem and I told her, if you want this to depict your family, if you want the characters to look like your family or people that like I really, support that. And she said to me, there's so much misinformation and inaccuracies when it comes to Palestinian stories and narratives that I want this to be as close to the reality as possible, which was incredible, because if you flip open the book, you'll see that she actually used my family photos as the end pages of the book.
Yes.
Which meant that, we had to send her hundreds and hundreds of photos of my family. And she did character sketches of my father and my sisters and I and my data. And, it was really incredible to see my own life, come to life through illustration. It was really beautiful.
They say that normally either the first work or the first major work by a writer is somewhat autobiographical or carries a lot more of a writer's own life or their own story than other works. Do you feel this is true? I mean, or?
Well, it certainly was for me. I mean, I think we all bring parts of ourselves and our own experience into our writing. But for me, it felt really important to have my family represented in exactly the way that events transpired, because I knew as soon as the book came out that there would be accusations that it was fabricated or that I was exaggerating things or that I had a political agenda with my book, as opposed to just telling the truth about my family. And so it was really important that we did, interview family members and get photographs and make sure that it was really, really correct. Of course, people still accused me of having an agenda and being inaccurate and, making things up. But I knew, and my family knows, and anyone who knows my family, that is our story.
What about your next work? Is it somewhat impacted by your personal story as well?
My first book looks backward. It looks back into my family's history. It looks at my ancestors and what happened to my family after the Nakba. And I realized that that's a natural inclination that Palestinians have, is to look back to a time when there was peace. But in the midst of all of this debate that happened in 2024, where newscasters were saying things like, when Palestinians say free Palestine, they are calling for a genocide of another people. I was so angry because nobody was interviewing Palestinians, asking what they wanted, for what they meant when they said free Palestine. And so my next picture book is called When Palestine is Free. And it's exactly that. It is a meditation on what I hope to be the future for Palestinians. It follows a family returning to their home in Jerusalem and what peace looks like. For me, it was almost a therapeutic process. I imagine my family, but I also imagine, hundreds of thousands and millions of other Palestinian families having the opportunity to return and what that would look like. So I'm absolutely informed by the events that have happened around me, but I don't know that it'll definitely be, the characters will necessarily represent family members as directly.
Do you feel that your genre of writing children's story is going to remain your genre? Have you ever thought of experimenting? Do you think you would write different genres of literary works at all?
Yeah, I think I have imposter syndrome when it comes to all writing. So I never thought I could write a children's book. And then I did. So I think that there are probably a lot of genres out there for me that I could experiment with. I think at this point, it's more about time. And there are so many talented writers that I would prefer to publish, doing the work that I may or may not be able to do. So for now, I'm taking a little bit of a break in writing, and I'm concentrating more on amplifying established writers.
Which you're an established writer yourself now. I mean, you're an award winner writing, and your writing is beautiful. I can definitely say that confidently. Do you feel that? Can you say something about what you think? I mean, I know this is a big question. The Arab American literary scene in general, and maybe the publishing scene as well. I mean, do you have any thoughts about that? Where it's heading? Where is it?
Yeah.
Where it is at right now?
It's so interesting because the Arab literature community is so small. We all know each other. So to us, our heroes, our incredible writers are really impactful in our own lives. But I've also worked at mainstream publishers where there are people in publishing, there are readers who have never read an Arab story. So while there are so many incredible Arab writers, I've also seen what is permeating the mainstream, and it's like the Kite Runner, and that doesn't even count. Yeah. It's really, I really hope for more mainstream representation. Unfortunately, I think the way that things are going politically in the United States, that is going to be harder and harder. But at the same time, we've seen some major publishers publish books by Palestinians, for the first time this year. Musab Abu Toa, who just published a book of poetry with Penguin Random House and became a New York Times bestseller. I never thought in my lifetime I would see a Palestinian on the New York Times bestseller list. So there are certainly movements that are happening. I would like to see a lot more of it. I think for the most part, Arabs are sort of ghettoized into certain genres. We can write about, trauma and history. We can write tragic war stories, but I want to see Palestinians writing fantasy. I want to see Arabs writing romance novels. I want to see it all. Graphic novels,
Graphic novels, yeah.
There's so much more potential that has yet to be realized. And I'm hoping that this new interest in Arab culture that has started in the last few years continues to grow. But I think we really need to force it. And it is a matter of forcing, because the gatekeepers who continue to propel white authors are not amplifying Arab voices. So it really is up to us to circumnavigate those gatekeepers, to find the readers more directly.
What do you think of the connection to Arabic literature in Arabic-speaking countries, to Arab American culture, to Arab American writing? Is there, do you have something to say about that? Do you have any ideas or thoughts about this? The language, the culture itself, the writers, whether mainstream writers over there or historically established writers, or new ones, or contemporary writers.
Yeah. I think my father would have so much more to say about this, because he's the one who's, traveling to the Middle East. He's acquiring all of our books in translation from Arabic, many of which he translates himself. But I can say that in 2024, I traveled to the Sharjah Children's Book Festival, and it just floored me. The fact that Sharjah had funded a week-long book festival for all of the children in the schools to come be bussed in and to interact with books. And that was something that, we really haven't seen here in the United States, something that's publicly funded like that. We're desperately holding on to our public libraries in this country.
Yeah.
So it was really incredible to see. I think that there is a growing culture of publishing in the Middle East. But also, you can't discount the fact that there is centuries of history of literature and storytelling. I think with any industry, we're seeing ebbs and flows throughout history, and I really
Yes.
hope to see more, more established Arabic publishers growing. I would love to have my book published in Arabic, where I'm in several conversations right now to try to get that done. But the practice of buying rights and translating just isn't as common in the Middle East, I think, as it is in other countries.
Yeah, the translation movement has always defined a lot of what happens in Arabic literature, from Mahfouz being translated after the Nobel Prize and to many other writers. And I think mostly it has been translating from Arabic into other languages, but translating Arab American literature from English into Arabic is still relatively new. So, I mean, a lot of readers in Arabic-speaking countries are not very much aware or are not reading Arab American writers in translation, while the other way around is more available. And I think this is an aspect. I'm glad your father is invested in this, and you are. Do you see translation as something that can be a connection at a certain point?
Oh, I think translation is so important. I think it is directly tapping into the pipeline and the voice of a people. We in the diaspora can write about our experiences as much as we like, but unless you're also reading the works of Arabs in the Middle East, you're going to have a degree of separation from that culture. So, our works in translation, they're certainly not the books that make the most money. In fact, readers in general are not reading literature in translation, especially from Arabic, but it is the program in our publishing house that is the most important to us. It really is the foundation. It is the reason my parents started a publishing house, to bring writers like, Ghassan Kanafani or Mahmoud Darwish to American readers. But also translation is very hard. Arabic is a supremely superior language. So to try to take Arabic and translate it into English is a real challenge, and you lose a lot, I think, in the translation.
Oh, yeah, that's definitely true. What do you think of stereotypes? Writing about a specific culture, particularly in diaspora, there is always this risk of stereotyping people of that culture, or maybe oversimplifying or flattening, focusing on food, focusing on rather caricaturish sort of description of an Arab character or an ethnic character, for instance. And there's also the question of negative depiction of those characters. What do you think of that?
I think it's really complicated because, you're certainly rewarded if you are writing into the stereotypes that exist within the United States. We have some of our most popular Arabic novels are popular because they reinforce the negative stereotypes about Arabs. They're about oppressed Muslim women, or they're about, men who become terrorists. There are real tangible rewards for reinforcing these stereotypes. And as a writer in the diaspora, you always have to consider the white audience who's going to be picking up your book. And what I've heard more recently is that Arab writers will shy away from maybe telling some real truths, because they're concerned about giving Arabs a bad image when we already have such a low standing in the societal hierarchy in this country. And so it is really restrictive. It means that we can't tell authentic stories because we have to concern ourselves with this narrative. This negative narrative is always in the room with our stories. And that's very frustrating. Even if it's a children's book, those stereotypes will be interpreted. I always make sure that, the men in my books are very warm and affectionate and have smiles on their faces, because I know that society believes that Arab men are inherently violent or strict or mean. It's hard to escape that. I really wish for a future where we could just be authentic. And if there is a mean Arab man, he can just be a mean Arab man because that's what the character requires and not because it is, some kind of stereotype. So I think it's really difficult now. I think for writers, they have to make that decision. Are we writing for our people? Are we writing to educate others?
Yeah, you long for a time when characterization or the literature is informed just by literature, by the literary or artistic requirement of writing a book, and not by just representation.
Yeah, I hope so.
Thank you so much for all of this. But one maybe last question: what's next for you? I know there's a forthcoming book, and I know you said you will dedicate some more time for publishing. Anything else? We'll be always on the lookout for new work, whether from Interlink or from or creative work from you. Do you have something else that you want to share that is coming up or that you're working on?
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many amazing books that are coming out from Interlink. We are about to publish a cookbook called Tanarine, which is the recipes from the iconic Palestinian Brooklyn restaurant, which is one of the oldest Palestinian restaurants in the country. I also edited a book called Genocide Bad, which is written by an activist named Sim Kern, who is a Jewish anti-Zionist activist who's really speaking directly to their own Zionist community and trying to convince them, that genocide is bad. There's so many book projects that are coming up. We are also at Interlink about to host our second ever tattoo flash fundraiser for Gaza, where tattoo artists are coming to our offices to give out tattoos, and all the funds will be donated to the Samud School, which is a friend of mine in Gaza who has established a tent school so that children can be educated throughout this year. So I can send you links for all of those if anyone wants to donate. But lots of great things coming up for us.
This is so good and to hear, and good luck to you. And you're enriching the community, and you're enriching the art scene and the creative scene, also the publishing scene. Thank you so much, Hannah, for this interview. It was a pleasure talking to you, and I'm sure we will be meeting again more than once, whether on campus or online for more interviews and more activities and more events.
Thank you so much for having me. I hope to make my way back to Dearborn, if not just for the kanafe.
Yeah, yes, that too. Yeah, definitely that too. Thank you, Hannah. This week's episode was hosted by Wissam El-Maliki. It was produced and edited by Muhammad Jafar. Our theme song was composed by Isra Darwish, and our logo was designed by Maysara Abdelhaq. Scene Jeem is brought to you by the Center for Arab American Studies at the University of Michigan Dearborn and the Arab American National Museum. It is funded by the University of Michigan Arts Initiative and the Center for Arab American Studies at the University of Michigan Dearborn. Check our website, scenejeempodcast.com, for more info on our guests. Thank you for listening.